Shalom, this is Daniel Stern of Netivyah, and today is April 20th, which is the birthday of my dear sister, so blessings to her. Let's start with some news that we've all come to hate, but we always have to hear because it's happening. The Prime Minister's office sent out a report that while the head of the Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, wastes time investigating the Prime Minister's office regarding Qatar, what's called Qatar Gate by its opponents, it turns out that for many months, the negotiations with the Hamas that take place in Qatar and were led by Ronen Bar were actually being subverted and working against the Prime Minister's directive, and were pushing the agenda of surrendering to the Hamas and giving in to all their demands. A new report came out a couple days ago that Ronen Bar will resign in May, even though he was already fired on April 10th. Former Shin Bet agent Yossi Ben Shmiol calls on his colleagues to categorize Bibi Netanyahu as a traitor and enemy and call for his investigation. Members of parliament from the opposition have raised the idea of leaving parliament and founding an alternative one. I wonder what will happen in that regard. Jerusalem Post chief editor, who was recently interrogated by the Shin Bet, tossed into prison, had his phones confiscated, and so on, claims to have yet to see a warrant or understand who approved these actions against him, especially seizing his phones, which have yet to be returned. Phones that, might I add, have a lot of information on confidential sources that it is very illegal to acquire against the wishes of a reporter, as it of course goes against the reporter's confidentiality. Anyways, the district attorney's recently revealed schedules show that she had meetings with many sources, widespread meetings, on the subject of removing the Prime Minister from his office, even after the High Court denied those that wished to broach that subject. On February 12, 2024, just a few months into the Gaza war, the DA held large-scale meetings on the subject. It is very suspicious that this was raised 6 weeks after the High Court had made the matter a non-issue. Moving on to another thing. There's a phenomenon of letters by former this and that's, pilots, SWAT commandos, and so on, as well as current this and that's, doctors, businessmen, academics, and lawyers, that demand that Israel end the war and do all to return the hostages, release all the prisoners, and so on. And my question is, why does this happen, and should we care about it? Well, the reason it happens is because there are those with a biased agenda that wish to tell us that all of these oh so noble people, academics and lawyers and doctors and pilots and commandos, if they are against the war in Gaza, then we should all have a problem with it. But the truth is that there are large parts of the population that are on every side of every argument, just like there were all over the world when it comes to economy and climate and vaccines and so on and so forth. So why should we care if 500 or 1,000 doctors want to release all of the Palestinian prisoners and so on and so forth, want to concede and surrender to the Hamas? Why should we care? There are thousands and tens of thousands that don't feel the same. We shouldn't care. It's letters of has-beens that have an opinion. Good luck to them. Who cares? But anyways, let's move on. The police just gave orders of closure to 6 UNRWA schools. And on the 8th of May, their activity, if any should continue beyond the 8th of May, shall be considered criminal. Now, as I promised, we're going to move away from internal politics and look at the area a little bit. So let's move on towards the Gaza Strip. First, the offer made by Israel about a week ago is as follows: that on the first day, the U.S. Citizen Idan Alexander will be released. And on the second day, 5 live-in hostages will be released in return for 66 terrorists with life sentences and 611 prisoners of the Gaza war. There will be no release ceremonies, and humanitarian supplies will start to trickle back in as long as there is a mechanism to make sure that it arrives properly and not be used by the Hamas to fuel their coffers and their war machine, as well as a repositioning of forces in North Gaza and in Rafah. On day 3, talks about what we call the day after, which is a weapon-free Gaza and an end to the war would happen. On day 7, 4 more live-in hostages would be returned for 54 terrorists with life prison sentences and 500 prisoners of the Gaza war, and the IDF would withdraw from expanded territory in central Gaza east of the Salah ad-Din corridor. On day 10, Hamas will provide information on all the live-in hostages that it has and would receive information in return on prisoners of war. On day 20, 16 bodies of dead hostages would be returned for 160 corpses of Palestinian terrorists. And this would give a total of a 45-day ceasefire, during which time there could be negotiations on the day after. This was an offer made by Israel towards Hamas that was refused by Hamas. On the other hand, Hamas accepted an offer that was not offered, that was not on the table, that is their wishful desires in thinking, which is Israel will stop all the wars and will rebuild the Gaza Strip and will end all violence and will move its soldiers out and will free all the Palestinian hostages in return for the hostages that Hamas still has. Well, thank you for accepting an offer that was not on the table. We don't care. Moving on. More things related to Gaza. The IDF has taken control of what it calls the Morag corridor, which is north of Rafah, north of Rafah, and south of Khan Yunis. It is parallel to the Philadelphia corridor, but somewhat farther north, which raises, of course, the question of what would happen in that zone. Would the people living there be moved to another part of the Gaza Strip, or possibly to Egypt? Time will tell. Moving a little bit farther out, the president of Indonesia says that they will accept additional Gazans beyond the 1,000 that were sent there as a work pilot. And there are reports of hundreds of Gazans that left the Gaza Strip for a dozen European countries. Moving a little farther out, in Lebanon, President Joseph Aoun made a dramatic announcement that the Hezbollah will hand over its weapons and will be incorporated into the army. Although the people responsible for doing that so far has been assigned to Shiite Muslims, which are basically Hezbollah or Hezbollah supporters. The IDF over the past few weeks has continued taking out strategic targets, bombing strategic individuals. For example, the chief of Hezbollah's communications in Lebanon. Moving on to Syria, 2 massive tent cities near the Turkish border are going to be repurposed for settling hundreds of thousands of Gazans. This is based on a foreign Arab news report. I only have one report, so I take it with a grain of salt. These tent cities were used during the Syrian civil war to house refugees. The first one is between Al-Bab and Aktrain, and the second one is east of Azaz. Moving a little farther out to Saudi Arabia, there are talks going on between the United States and Saudi in order to reach an energy agreement that would allow for civilian nuclear energy. The United Arab Emirates. There are sources that say that the United Arab Emirates have stationed an Israeli-made radar system, the ELM 2084 MMR, in the Gulf of Aden. I wonder if this relates to combating the Houthis, or maybe something more. Time will tell. Moving farther out to Iran. Recently, the U.S. has been airlifting heavy bombs and THAAD anti-air defense systems to Israel in preparation of an Iranian strike. And now, in regards to the Iranian strike, there is a recent big story about how the information about the Iranian strike was revealed and why the person who revealed it, whether to the journalist or the journalist himself, are not being accused of any crimes similar to other right-wing personnel that are being tossed into dungeons without lawyers. We spoke about this the last few episodes. But if you're on the left, then of course nothing happens to you. The army censorship has even criticized this reporter, but all cases against him have been closed. In any case, what is the big reveal? The original Iranian plan, the strike on Iran, was a large version of what Israel did in Syria in September, where they used a large bombing as a distraction, as cover for commando units that were dropped down on the ground and would damage the nuclear sites. Unfortunately, it would take more time than was allowed. The IDF wanted this to be ready by October, which was the date when the general in charge of CENTCOM was departing, and that was not possible. So the new plan would be a massive, week-long bombing, and at the same time, a defensive plan for the retaliation that would most certainly come. In Yemen, moving a little farther out, we can see that the American B-2 bombers are using the GBU-57 bunker busters, which are 12-ton bombs, the largest ever used, and this is the first time in history that they are being used. One could say that this is a test for Iran. And on that regard, we can see that the US continue to bomb daily. Sana'a and Hodeidah are the main targets. Last night, 50 attacks were done on Yemenite territory. And there are rumors that the Yemeni government, the one who is not the Houthis, are preparing 80,000 troops to take over the Houthi-controlled land, along with, of course, the cover of US airstrikes. Now moving much, much farther out to Pakistan, where 170 people were arrested because of attacks against KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, as a result of their connecting KFC to the US stand on Gaza and supporting Israel. And let's come back home. On this Wednesday, we will be starting the celebration of the Holocaust Memorial Day, which takes place Thursday and starts Wednesday evening here in Israel. And we would like to remind you that there are still living witnesses to the atrocities of the Holocaust still alive today in Israel and around the world. And we want to honor and respect them. And we here at Netivyah do our best to do that. Every few months we invite them here and provide them a festive meal, mostly for the holidays, along with gifts. And we would like to encourage you to pray for the Holocaust survivors. They are the last living witnesses to the atrocities of the Holocaust, that even today there are those around the world that not only choose to ignore, but try to repeat. So it is very important to have these people still tell us what happened so that we can say never again. Shalom.